EVs are a scam. Not really. There's a lot more nuance to what EVs are and are not. And I just wanted to initiate this discussion because a lot of these finer points are kind of lost in the overall EV versus ICE debate. It's essential to have an opinion, but it's pretty much essential to be open to other aspects and other ideas as well.
Yeah, there's no reason to get combative about it. It doesn't need to be Android versus Apple.
Apple all the way. Anyway, so what we're talking about is electric vehicles, and some context. I've been living with an electric vehicle in some form or the other for the past 8 odd months, and I have kind of lived that EV life. No, I don't hug trees, but anyway, I have lived that life for quite a while. So I think I have a fair idea of how the ecosystem operates in India at this moment. But this is something that we'll get to in the later part of the video. The first bit that I wanted to discuss with regards to EVs in general was how they're being projected as saviors of the planet, right? Of course, there are zero tailpipe emissions, right? But do you really think they are saving the environment as such?
In this discussion, what always lands up becoming the flare point or flash point for a lot of the chatter that happens, especially online, is that everybody will cite a certain study, some kind of document, a research issue that was put out. The problem with all of this is you never know what is the bias of the origin source of that study. If you want to be pro-hybrid, you will find research studies to be pro-hybrid. If you want to be pro-EV, you will find research studies for that. Because ultimately, almost every one of these will have some kind of think tank behind it. That think tank has been funded by someone who has some kind of vested interest.
Sure.
So at the very least, if I were to use a blanketing statement, no, obviously EVs are not a scam, but EVs are the future, yes, but I feel like the future is more electrified if you're looking at it more holistically than pure EV.
Right. One of the arguments that comes up, and it kind of gets on my nerves just a little bit, is when people say, oh, your EVs have lithium in their batteries. Lithium is being mined. Now, newsflash, human existence has come out of mining.
Yes.
Pretty much everything we use, we've basically messed with Mother Nature for.
Yeah.
Whether it's basic wood for your furniture, whether it's any kind of plastic that you're using, whether it is any kind of material that goes into building your cars. You talk about steel, aluminum, everything that has to originate from somewhere, right? And yes, lithium is being mined. Yes, they're using diesel trucks to mine lithium. Yes, it is not as, let's say, environmentally friendly as people would want you to think it is. But why are we so blind to the fact that the alternative is oil, which genuinely involves drilling in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah, and there are different variables to that, right? Like you said, human existence as a modern civilization will come at the cost of the environment in one way or the other. It is simply unless you actually live a life like one of the tribes do, we are going to end up damaging the environment by one way or the other, whether it's the home you live in or the car you buy. The reason why I feel like there's certain aspects of the whole fossil fuel supply chain that we tend to ignore, for example. Yes, it's not lithium mining, but there is oil drilling. But also, let's not forget, there is the transmission of that refined oil to the place where it has to be dispensed. In India, for example, right now we've got, by last check, I think close to 80,000 fuel dispensary stations, petrol bunks. Each one of these fuel stations is receiving its petrol and diesel by an at least equal number of trucks. That to transport that fuel to the bunk is burning fuel on its own.
Sure.
There are tailpipe emissions on that front. Then afterwards, once the fuel gets over there, it enters the vehicles. And when it comes to the vehicle usage stage, that is also a place where you see a lot of inefficiency when it comes to petrol or diesel cars.
Sure. 2 points. This is where a lot of ICE manufacturers will quote a term called thermal efficiency. Thermal efficiency, and this is in the most simplest way that I can put it, physics and chemistry grads, don't come at me. It is an engine's capability of converting fuel into propulsion, right? So thermal efficiency of a petrol or a diesel engine ranges anywhere between 20 to 30%, right? The numbers, depending on the study you read, there are a variety of numbers that they will quote. Hydrogen is slightly higher, right? EVs are much higher at 85 to 90%. In some case, it has gone beyond 90% as well. So from a pure efficiency standpoint of how much fuel is going in versus the propulsion that you're getting out of it, the movement, the motion that you're getting out of it, EVs inherently are going to be a lot more efficient.
Yes.
Right? I think it was a study by Yale. I'm going to put it down in the description. That said, even if, I think this was a study that was central to America, they said even if America as a whole generated electricity using nothing but coal and ran electric vehicles off of that, from an efficiency standpoint, it is still going to be more efficient than running ice.
Yeah, and that extends into another part of the debate, that if your energy source is going to be quote unquote dirty, what is the point of an electric vehicle? That is a very valid perspective to have, right? You want the entire process to be as clean as possible. But the parallel I draw over there is similar to a country like India having a space program.
Yeah.
It doesn't absolve the fact that there are certain grassroots issues that we are still trying to work on. But that doesn't mean that you have to focus on one thing only.
Yeah.
Two things can be true at the same time. So let's say, yes, if you do have fuel being generated right now in India, largely driven by thermal sources like coal, it doesn't mean like the shift towards renewable sources is not happening.
Yeah.
And you cannot be in a position where you're waiting, ki, I want my entire fuel supply to become green, then I will start encouraging electric vehicles. It is a simultaneous process that needs to happen. And evolution as a function is what's going to make the entire sort of ecosystem balance out somewhere in the future. But you have to start multiple things at the same time. You cannot be selective to do one thing and then move to the next in this context.
Sure. And I want to bring up another point where you said electricity is electricity.
Yeah.
Fuel can be adulterated.
Yes.
Right? Sure, you'll have different levels of electricity supply going to a particular region. But once the grid is strong enough, right? Once you ensure a bare minimum supply, the power going to your EV in Mumbai is going to be the same as the power going to my EV in Ladakh.
Exactly. And there's no scope for mixing in kerosene or some kind of adulteration to, control what kind of profits the dealer might be making. And let's not forget, going forward, fuel itself is going to have more additives. There's going to be ethanol. Like right now, one of the big questions that comes up with petrol and diesel vehicles is the blend of fuel that's going in.
Yeah.
So you have E10, E20, flex fuel. There's a lot of stuff that's leading into varieties of confusion, which will simply not be the case with EVs because electricity is electricity. You cannot change the grade of it. Right. There is no V-power electricity and standard petrol electricity.
There's simply different charging speeds.
Yes.
But other than that, electricity is electricity.
Yeah.
Right? And by and large, an EV, the maximum losses that happen into an EV is while charging. Say, for example, you have a 20 kilowatt hour battery pack. It will probably need a little more energy than that to charge up. But there are minimal losses in terms of AC and power steering and stuff like that. And regen feeds energy back into the system. By and large, an EV in terms of efficiency is very high, right? But efficiency is only one part of the equation. I want to move on to things that kind of excite me as a petrol head. It's the drive and the performance. Right? So context, again, we've driven practically every single EV that's on sale in India right now.
More or less.
Standouts have obviously been the Ioniq 5, the Kia EV6, right? But apart from these, even the everyday EVs like the Punch, like the Nexon, even the Tiago for that matter, they have this ability to, give you a little tickle, make you feel a little fuzzy in the stomach because of the way they deliver their power, right? And we'll probably get pitchforks and brickbats for saying this. Over the past couple of weeks, we drove some really powerful cars. We drove the AMG GD63 SE Performance Hybrid 4-door coupe.
Yes.
And a car with the diametric opposite name, the BMW XM. Right. Both have monstrous V8s.
Yeah.
both, I think the torque figure on the AMG is what, 1430 Nm.
Yeah.
Right? I've put it in race mode, and race launch, and I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, because that's the other reality of it, that we associate petrol cars with utter excitement, and
Yeah.
granted they do. But I feel like that discussion is more reserved for what's happening online, because by and large, if you look at the mass market cars we have available, right, they're not meant for that.
Yeah.
They give you easygoing performance. They're not giving you particularly good exhaust notes. When you accelerate, the entire car is not shaking like it does in Fast and Furious. None of the stuff is happening. And even at the extreme end of the spectrum, like the Mercedes AMG GT63 SE Performance 4-door coupe, that thing by regulations is being muted.
Yeah.
So then if my exhaust note is going to be muted, if my acceleration with a not even comparable but a lower segment electric car in terms of what feel I get off the line is going to be stronger with an EV that's possibly much cheaper, and then you're having to offer synthesized sounds from the speaker to get that level of excitement, if the feeling of rawness by regulation, by demand, is being muted for ICE vehicles,
Yeah.
the excitement variable can be evolved and elaborated on in the EV front as well. You
Right.
look at a car like the Ioniq 5 N line,
N.
the
Oh.
N.
Oh, I want that car to come to India so that I can hog it for a really long time and just do a lot of slidey things with it. And there's one point that I want to bring up. ICE cars have had about 50, 60 years of evolution. This is the beginning of EVs.
Exactly.
You look at
exactly.
something like an Ioniq 5N, the kind of sounds it's making, the kind of pace it's able to carry. Granted, something with a massive battery pack right down is not going to be a handling god,
Yes.
right? That is something you cannot take away from a nice car. But as a daily driver, that gives you a little bit of a fizz in the stomach every time you punch that accelerator. Electric cars are pretty much already there.
And we've seen the apples to apples comparison, right? We've driven the Tata Tiago with the petrol, we've driven it with its old diesel, we've driven it with CNG, we've driven it with EV.
Yeah.
If you ask me which Tiago to buy, the Tiago EV. The Punch, we've again driven it with
Punch
a
EV.
different, again, you go with Punch EV. Again, Nexon. Nexon, the
Nexon
EV
EV.
is the version to buy.
Yeah.
Because the powertrain's performance is smooth, it's more relaxed. It is the absolute pinnacle of automatic transmission experience you're going to get, right? More than CVT, more than torque converter, everything, because it
Direct
just has to
drive.
go through that one gear.
Yeah.
That's all it's doing. So it gives you the sophistication over there. And in the mass market, where most of us live in our budget spaces, the kind of excitement in terms of performance that an electric car can give you access to, you would have to spend significantly more money to get that same level with an ICE vehicle.
Right.
And like it or not, ICE vehicles by regulations are being muted to the extent that the playing field is getting more level. I'm not getting into handling over here.
Yeah.
And I do agree that if you're looking for the absolute best in terms of the visceral experience of driving a car, it would have to be a petrol.
Yeah.
But then in that context, I'm talking about a Porsche 718 Spider.
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to get one of those. It
Or
is
a
a handful.
911 GT3. My list
All of
probably has more Porsches than
Even a
anything, but
Mustang V8 for that
Yeah.
matter. Like there are options,
Yeah.
but not everyone is getting those, and that has its own space. I'm talking about the general population
Yeah.
who does, like it or not, see electric vehicles or vehicles at large as devices meant to fit a certain purpose.
Yeah.
Electric cars will do that fine.
And here's where the general population at large will really like electric vehicles. Okay. Now, I've learned that if you own an electric vehicle, you have to have charging at home and / or office.
Yeah, I feel like this is the most important part of the discussion.
If
charging.
you do not have that, it is a bit of a pain. But given I have lived with EVs based purely, running purely on public infrastructure. Even then, where I'm paying ridiculous rates to charge my car, even then, it is hilariously cheap. Okay. Now I've got experience with the Tiago EV, the Ioniq 5, the Kia EV6, and the Nexon EV. All have been fast charged, right, multiple times over when I've had the cars for test. Now I'll give you the example of a Nexon EV, right? So from 20 to 100%, if I fast charge it, it costs me somewhere around 700 to 750 bucks. And this is a fast charger, mind you, right? If I plug it into a 7.2 kilowatt AC charger, the cost is probably lower by another 200, 250 bucks. So for 80%, which gives me roughly 250 kilometers of range, that is around anywhere from 500 to 750 bucks, which means my cost per kilometer is anywhere from 2 to 3 rupees, 3.5 rupees at the upper end. You own a Grand Vitara hybrid.
I do. Oh.
As he's made clear in many ZigAnalysis videos, right? And because I've been in the passenger seat of his Grand Vitara hybrid multiple times, I know that his car manages 900 kilometers on a tank, which is phenomenal for a petrol car, very easily. Your car has a 45-liter fuel tank, which means it's doing roughly around 20 kilometers per liter. And fuel prices right now are somewhere a little over 100, right? So that is 4,700 to 5,000 rupees for 900 kilometers. That works out to be anywhere between 4.5 to 4.7 rupees per kilometer. Imagine saving 2.5 rupees every single kilometer you drive. And this is when I'm comparing the cost of charging something like a Nexon EV at the public charger. If I did it at home, if I had that facility, it would be probably half that, right? Imagine savings imagine it costing you just a rupee per kilometer or a rupee and a half per kilometer, which is why I say if your usage is fixed, even if it is absurdly high, if it is within the comfort range of an EV, I'll explain what I mean. Say, for example, Tata claims 421 on 456 rather on the Nexon EV, 421 on the Punch. We know from our drive to deaths that the Nexon EV does 300 on a good day,
pretty easily,
285 on a bad day. The Punch will do 260 on a bad day, 280, 290 on a good day. If your usage falls within this comfort range and you've got the opportunity to charge at home and or at office, you can drive the cars pretty much day in, day out, and they would actually save you a lot of money. And I bring this point up because once when I was fast charging, I met this gentleman who had a ZS EV with over a lakh odd kilometers on the odo, and the car was a little under a year and a half or 2 years old, right? And that guy has been driving from the outskirts of Bombay on one end to the outskirts of Pune, right? If I'm not wrong, somewhere around 200 kilometers was his daily running, well within the comfort range of a ZS EV, and it's costed him basically nothing, right? If he were to run an equivalent diesel car, right? I have the numbers, okay? An equivalent diesel car, even if it gave him 20 kilometers per liter, he would have spent 3.2 lakh rupees on fuel alone, right? And if this person had relied only on public infra, which he did not, right? He would spend about 2 lakh on charging the car. The savings there are huge, especially if your running is absurdly high, but within the comfort range.
I think that clarity of thought is there where people understand that the operational cost of an electric car is obviously going to be better.
Yeah.
There is a reason why even you have like Shivneri or BST, all these public services moving to EV, because they save so much. And the fact of the matter is fuel is never going to get any cheaper. It is going to become a resource that is getting more and more restricted. They're going to try and jack up the price, make what money they can from whatever country is supplying it. But where I feel like the issue is, and why I will never, at least at this stage, go out and outright say that electric cars are the only future, is because this move needs to happen more gradually with regard to the kind of targets that we have set, that by 2030 every car on the road has to be electric. No, I do not see a feasible way for this to happen, because yes, there are enough people who have a fixed route, who have predictable chargers right now.
Yeah.
That is because the level of EV penetration with the new car market is maybe 1.5–2%, something like that.
Yeah.
That is going to go up as a number. And I'll give you my own example. My building has got 4 electric car chargers. These are slow AC fast chargers, not DC fast chargers. And we have got, out of a building that has some 12 to 15 buildings, each building with 4 floors on each floor. 4 flats on each floor. Imagine if all of these people, which comes out to a pool of maybe 300 to 350 cars, if they needed that charging source of just 4 charge outlets, which by the way have already been used up by the handful of EVs that are there in the society, it's not feasible. And not all of them have stilt parking. If you have stilt parking, sure, then it's just a question of the headache that you deal with societies getting permission for installing an electrical line and all. And I feel like you don't even need the 7.2 wall box charger, I think, a simple 15 amp plug. And if you got the thing with charging with EVs is that with petrol or diesel cars or CNG vehicles or even hydrogen, if that is the case, fueling up the vehicle is a task that you go and do separately.
Yeah.
With EVs, the nature of the task needs to be the same as you have with a mobile phone or an iPad, wherein you're doing something and simultaneously the car just happened to get charged.
Yeah.
So if I'm coming to my workplace, I've left it there, it's getting charged. We're doing this video right now. The Nexon EV is there, getting charged.
Yeah.
There is no separate task or deviation I'm having to make for that. It has to be that convenient, wherein it's just everywhere you need to have available plug points, and that is the only way and only point rather where I can agree to the fact that yes, EVs are for everyone. Right now, it's not there.
Like, I like giving this example to people. I say, imagine once you've driven your petrol or diesel car home, you've gone home. Imagine some little genie comes in, tanks up your car and leaves. And every morning you wake up to a full tank of petrol or diesel. That would be very convenient. That is the convenience that an electric vehicle is giving you today.
Correct.
Right? Sure, the one bit that I agree with is that the infra is not there yet, but infra needs to be developed, and that is clearly on the agenda if the government is going to push for EVs at large, right? If every single parking slot had a 15 amp plug point at the least, right, you'd at least have the opportunity to recover the range you spent getting to that place. For example, I very recently went to a mall that has free EV charging, right? They have designated spots. Now, I drove around 20 kilometers to that mall, plugged the car in, and I got about 30 kilometers of range back in the 1 hour that, the car was left charging. My trip to that mall was free. The one mindset shift that I have had to make is that I don't need a full charge every time. 100% every time is not necessary. मैं जाके दूध लेके आ रहा हूँ, ठीक है? So I don't need 100%.
Correct.
Sure, if I am doing longer distances, I will want that because I want a buffer, right? But other than that, finding opportunities to charge, that is where the mindset shift needs to happen. And once that happens, I think living with an EV is a lot easier.
There are two things on that charging front though that I feel need to be addressed right now. Like, the first problem is something very specific to major cities, I'd say, like Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai and all, where not everybody has access to a proper parking space designated for them.
Yeah.
Like, the first layer is tilt parking, where you can have your own line put in, at the very least a basic plug point. Then you have a designated spot, but out on the open, where there's no real source for you to plug in something, like I said, is with my car's case. And the third case is street parking.
Yeah.
A lot of people live in housing societies that did not have a lot of parking, which means they put it out on the street. These kind of people will ultimately be very dependent on the public charging network.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's very difficult to make that happen, because if it was a question of cars having to come in, spend even 10 minutes on charging, if you gave a cap of 10 minutes and cars can get at least 50 to 60 kilometers worth of charge in that time, it's still feasible. But otherwise, if you go to a petrol bunk in the same way where you have an EV charger lined up over there, it's still going to be a 3 to 5 minute process with your petrol or diesel car, but it's going to be at least a half an hour to 35-minute long process with an electric car. Right. So that it's easier said than done on that front. The second issue for me with charging is the sheer number of apps. And this is the same issue I have with entertainment content, right? I will never bother getting domestic cable now, but Netflix is a different app. YouTube Premium is a different app. Amazon is a different app. Hotstar is a different app. And I've got to keep track of individual payments and, setting whatever auto debits for all of these apps. And similar with these EV things, if I want to use a charger, I will have to maintain a minimum balance. But everywhere I go, necessarily, I won't come across that charger.
Yeah.
That is one place where I feel like they need to establish or rather continue the pattern that we're already familiar with.
Yeah.
India as a country does not dispense its own fuel. We have it, somebody comes and puts it to us. India as a country does not rely on fuel bunks needing apps from you. You go, you pay in cash, you pay by card, whatever
and
it is, and you're out. Somebody else does it for you. So if I can just swipe my card, pay a preset amount maybe, it doesn't need to be 100% charge, but you can at least get some kind of idea that 200 kilometers will get me X number of kilowatt hours worth of charge. 200 rupees rather. So if I can do that, it will just simplify the entire process, and I don't need to worry about going somewhere, scanning a QR, dealing with a user interface that was made by some idiot, maintaining balance, transferring funds and not having it reflect, calling up a call center that never picks up. None of the business needs to happen.
Now, I remember spending around 20 to 30 minutes just trying to get the Tiago EV charged. Okay,
Hmm.
the charger is connected to the car. The car is recognizing charger is connected. Very good. The charger is recognizing charger connected to car. Very good. The app is saying yes, connected. Very good. But the charger is not sending data to the server that enables it to start charging. Now this has involved a 5-minute phone call, 2 failed UPI payments, and one very frustrating customer service executive trying to just figure out. And this was particularly frustrating because I was extra adventurous with the Tiago at that point in time. I was at maybe 3 or 4%, and that was my only option.
Hmm.
Right? Long story short, after 30 minutes of hassle, ho gaya. But this ecosystem has to function smoothly. And for the love of God, I cannot be bothered with maintaining account balances in 7 different apps. I just
Yeah, yeah.
cannot. Right? Uh, the one bit that I'd like to see happen is, like you said, EV bunks becoming a thing. Now, if you remember, we'd driven the Kia EV6 to death,
Hmm.
and we charged it at 120 kilowatt.
Yeah.
Right? Every minute, I was getting 5 kilometers of range at 120 kilowatt. Right? Say hypothetically, in the future, battery tech and charging tech comes to a point where I can get at least 10 kilometers per minute, and I spend the exact same amount of time trying to refuel my EV
Hmm.
as you spend filling your petrol car. In 5 minutes, I have anywhere between 90 to 100 kilometers of range, enough to comfortably get me home, put it on slow charge. I'd be very happy with that, right? Because in general, fast charging repeatedly for an EV is not good to begin with,
Hmm.
right? These are all emergency charges, and I really wish we come to a point where this is possible. Now, on to the next point where EVs are really taking a beating and a half,
Yeah.
right? Which is resale.
Yeah.
Now, the first lot of, I want to call them Enthu cutlets, and also people who are, let's say, pro change, let's call it
Hmm.
that, they bought their EVs.
Hmm.
They've got anything from a 10 lakh rupee Tiago to a crore rupee EQE, EQS, EQC. And the problem thereon is what next, A, and B, who do I give this car to?
Yeah, because the biggest question when it comes to EVs is what is the life of this battery? Not so much with the motor, but with this battery, how many more charge cycles do we have with this? And yes, up until the point that it's in the warranty period, it's all good, right? Most are offering 8 years
Yeah.
to 1,60,000 kilometers, whatever comes quicker. Those kind of warranties are present. But the simple fact is, yes, there is degradation over the life of an electric car.
Yeah.
And there is no clear understanding as to what that translates to. In terms of, we know that most cars today with petrol or diesel engines, they are fully capable of running at the very least to 1 to 1.5 lakh kilometers with a motor that's running fine,
Absolutely
reliably.
fine. Yeah.
There are definitely exceptions that can go way more than that, but that's a function of how you maintain, what fuel maintain, etc., etc. It's not that degradation doesn't happen with petrol or diesel cars. When I bought my Honda Jazz in 2010 or 11, it was giving me 13 to 14 kilometers per liter pretty easily. By the end of its life, when I sold it at 98,000 kilometers, it was doing 8 to 9 kilometers per liter. It had taken degradation through the ages. Wear and tear does happen.
Yeah.
Parts do get old. Efficiency does drop.
Yeah.
That does happen with EVs as well. The problem is that with electric cars, the battery is such an expensive component over there that if it does not live up to that baseline range expectation, right, it's going from ARAI to real world to degradation, and then what? That is where that question comes up, where resale value is, for all intents and purposes, right now, a gamble. It is still a gamble.
It is a complete gamble at this point. The only silver lining to this degradation cloud is that batteries and individual cells can be repurposed for non-automotive use. Right? Sure, you might need something with 100% battery health for an electric vehicle, but individual cells that are either at 100 or slightly lower than that can be used for other applications. Like, I remember Audi sending a very interesting press release where slightly degraded batteries from a few prototypes of theirs and a few EVs of theirs made their ways into e-rickshaws in India, right? So these rickshaws, for example, they don't need to have a 500-kilometer range.
Yeah.
They possibly need 100, 150, which even the degraded battery will manage to do.
True.
Right? So what you're doing is you're kind of postponing the end of life and, nichodoing, for lack of a better word, every ounce of energy and every ounce of battery cycles that the battery has to really offer. But that said, I am not certain about how the EV resale market in India is going to shape up. Purely because there is a lot of skepticism based on there is no real way for a buyer to inspect the car and figure out what's up.
Yeah,
Right?
if there was
Sure,
some way for them to plug in and just say that
they
battery health
can.
equals X,
Yeah,
that
sure.
would be a simple way
They
to do
could
it.
probably do that, but what does that X eventually translate to? That is something he has to figure out by actually taking that gamble. Right?
But to be fair,
Yeah.
that gamble exists even in the modern day petrol or diesel car.
It does.
Like, you can polish up, clean up, you can roll back the miles on a car. Unfortunately, it happens very often.
Yeah.
There's no way for you to dip your finger into the engine oil and say that, okay, it's got X number of kilometers left in it. It could break down the second you drive it out.
The only difference with a petrol and diesel car is that filling it up once gives you at least 300 to 400 kilometers immediately. And even if you're stranded on the side of the road, one guy with a Bisleri bottle can sort you out for the time being. Not so with an EV, where I think the skepticism comes from. And the second bit is not the entirety of the country has stable electricity going on right now.
Yeah, we're bracing for a power cut that might happen anytime right now.
Right? So that is a very real concern. Resale as a whole is completely uncharted, right? And I want to see how that shapes up.
I think that's also linked to the fact that goes back to the same discussion that we were having before, right? Like, ICE vehicles have reached their pinnacle. Whatever incremental gains they're making are just that. They're incremental in terms of thermal efficiency or what they can manage. Or maybe they will shift into sustainable fuels, like we're seeing with Formula One. But in the case of electric vehicles, the stuff is just starting now.
Yeah.
Even in India, they've really become a proper conversation after the Nexon EV, 2016, 17. That is when we're starting to see this happen, which means the question becomes, is the battery architecture available right now too nascent stage for me to be being the person who's buying it? I don't want to buy electric vehicles at their nascent stage. I want to buy it when they're at that peak. When that peak is coming, if that peak is coming, is battery density, energy value going to get that much higher? Are battery packs going to become that much lighter to save that core issue of bigger battery pack equaling heavier car equaling lesser range, which means it lands up fighting itself? This is again one of the reasons what feeds into the resale value becoming a big question mark. Because you don't know what its evolution. Neanderthals didn't know that they'd land up where we are. It just takes time.
Sure. So by and large, if I were to get a reaction from you, do you think EVs are for everyone?
They will become for everyone.
Okay.
And I think that one major trigger for this is also going to be, one, obviously the government is pushing for it. So policies are going to shape you in the way they prefer. The second thing is, India has seen 2 and 3-wheeler electric adoption like no other country has. For a lot of people, the baseline understanding of what motoring is going to be electric.
Yeah.
Right? People like to draw parallels to a distant past where cars used to feel like something and all. Newsflash, at least in the Indian context, most of us never experienced cars at all.
Yeah.
So for us to move from the willing adoption from petrol scooter to EV scooter or EV 3-wheeler has been quite easy. So when that experience comes in and they enter the car world, getting their first car, their understanding of what sophisticated performance is going to come from an electric 2-wheeler or 3-wheeler.
Yeah.
So when they're expecting that in their 4-wheeler as well, the baseline is already set. The expectations are already high, and it is very difficult for a petrol or diesel car to match up to what an EV can offer in terms of sophistication. The reason why I don't believe it is for everyone right now is for the aforementioned points, right? There has to be a certain equilibrium between the number of electric vehicles plying on the road to the number of chargers readily available. There are certain characteristics about fueling up petrol or diesel cars that can translate to EVs, like we discussed, of paying for a charging benefit rather than using an app or something, fiddling around with that. But at the same time, the behavioral charging or behavioral fueling up of electric vehicles is very different from petrol or diesel cars, wherein it's incidental to something that you're doing. And until it can reach that point, I don't think it's for everyone. There is the issue of parking. there is the issue of charging, there is the issue of power cuts
Yeah.
that are happening, and it's not something that's restricted to small towns or villages. It happens on the outskirts of major cities like Mumbai as well.
Sure.
So it is easier said than done. What I do believe in is, yes, we should put electric. Yes, electric as a technology is superior to ICE, hands down.
Yeah.
But we need to give options.
Right.
Offer flex fuels, offer hydrogen, offer petrol. Stop beating on diesel. It really isn't the demon that they're making it out to be.
Yeah.
Give the option, but on its merits as a product, electric by itself has the capability to convince people that I am the right solution for you.
I agree. And I'm just going to wrap this discussion up with 2 points. Okay. The first point I'm going to make is kind of controversial. A 15 lakh rupee EV is better than an equivalent 15 lakh rupee car. Maybe not in terms of size, but in terms of everything else. Like, I'd buy a ZS EV over a Seltos turbo petrol.
Okay.
Okay, I'd buy a Punch EV over a Venue line, probably, right? Size not barring, the drive quality, the acceleration, and the general silence and the cost efficiency of an EV is better, right? The second point and the final point that I want to make is, I agree, EVs are not for everyone. They will become one of the things that you drive, and probably the chunk of buyers opting for EVs will be substantially higher, right? Where your regular commuter vehicles become EVs first. Your rickshaws, your buses, your e-rickshaws, scooters, mopeds, right? All discretionary, pleasure-driven automobiles. God bless the V8s, V10s, V12s. For the minuscule portion of population that enjoys that, they will have that option. EVs are simply trying to democratize that kind of performance for a lot lower money. And I see a future where commuter cars become electric, even if not entirely so.
And yeah, and a major trigger to make that happen will also have to be the equilibrium in terms of upfront purchase cost also.
Yeah.
Because right now, there is a big gap of lakhs of rupees between a normal petrol or diesel car and electric. Somewhere down the line, that will reach a balance.
Yeah.
But I feel like the outright belief that electrics are the only option, or saying that to hell with electrics, ICE is the only way forward, is not the right solution. It's not the right perspective to have. It makes great for engagement on internet discussions, but it's not realistic. What we need is a middle ground. What we need is option. What we need is for evolution to take its course, and for us to understand that certain technologies have become more advanced. They do make more sense for more use cases today. And as long as we have options, everybody wins.
Yeah, they do. So that was the long and short of this discussion. I hope it was electric. Bad joke. Anyway, if you agree with us, disagree with us, comments, like, share, subscribe. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.
Bye-bye.